Whistleblower Dr. Limeng attests the CCP virus was made in a lab, but in 2013, Chinese scientists already created a virus that many warned could lead to a global pandemic. China's e-commerce giant Alibaba's financial affiliate Ant Group is set to go public in Hong Kong. A DC-based advocacy group is warning that the company's ties with the Chinese regime could make it a potential target of U.S. sanctions, bringing risks to investors. 70 pounds of gold bars, $1 million in cash, over 20 luxury cars, all received by one low-level party official in China within just 5 years through bribery. And the U.S. seems to care less and less how the Chinese Communist Party feels. The second high-level U.S. official is visiting Taiwan despite threats from Beijing. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A new report on the origin of the CCP virus once again puts the issue in the spotlight. But 7 years ago, Chinese researchers already created a hybrid virus that scientists warn could lead to a global pandemic. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
A report from a Chinese virologist supports claims that the CCP virus could have been made in a lab. Dr. Limeng, a scientist who fled China earlier this year, published the paper on an open-access digital platform. The paper has yet to be peer-reviewed. Whether or not the virus was man-made remains a point of staunch debate. But years ago, Chinese scientists were found to have created a new, potentially lethal virus strain. And if released, it could trigger a global pandemic. In 2013, a group of Chinese researchers combined two viruses in the lab. One is highly lethal, but doesn't spread easily from human to human. The other is far less deadly, but spreads very easily. The highly lethal virus is H5N1, more commonly known as avian influenza, or bird flu. In line with its name, it usually only spreads from birds to humans. But Chinese scientists were able to create a new hybrid from it, which spreads easily between guinea pigs. Now, the strain is more transmissible between mammals. Chen Hualan, director of China's National Avian Influenza Lab, led the study. State media applauded her achievement. The paper was published on Science magazine's website, but it quickly drew backlash from the scientific community. Senior scientists criticized the Chinese researchers, saying the new hybrid virus could cause a global pandemic if accidentally leaked from the lab. Robert May, a former chief scientist for the British government, called the researchers appallingly irresponsible. In an interview with British newspaper The Independent, he said, "The record of containment in labs like this is not reassuring. They are taking it upon themselves to create human-to-human transmission of very dangerous viruses." During the study, Chinese researchers created over 100 novel viruses in the lab. They said the study aimed to further vaccine development, but May wasn't convinced. He added, "They claim they're doing this to help develop vaccines and such like. In fact, the real reason is that they're driven by blind ambition with no common sense whatsoever." Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now to the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, virus situation in China. A new case of the virus was confirmed on Tuesday in Hezhi City inside Shandong Province. This, according to an internal document that's circulating online. So far, there's been no Chinese media coverage of the outbreak. A resident from Jiji village told us that the new patient was discovered inside their village. He first tested positive for the virus after returning from Dubai last month. At the time, he received treatments until his symptoms disappeared, but now he's facing another round of symptoms. As a result, the village is under lockdown, roads and highways have been blocked, and villagers are forbidden from leaving. A video is circulating on Chinese social media, warning people to steer clear of the village. More than 200,000 people in southwest China's Ruili city are being made to take the CCP virus tests. That's as the city is now under lockdown amid a local outbreak. Local authorities are even encouraging residents to report those who refuse to be tested, offering incentives in exchange for information. City officials have only reported 2 new infections so far. But according to local media, a makeshift hospital with enough room for nearly 1,000 patients was built nearby. Construction was reportedly completed the same day the city's lockdown was announced. According to another report that same day, 200 medical staff from the neighboring Dali city were sent to Rayleigh for backup. The harsh measures are surprising many. Some locals have started to question why officials are pushing for such an extreme response if there are really only 2 confirmed cases in the area. The CCP is still pushing its campaign to replace the Mongolian language with Standard Chinese. But now it's planning new measures to suppress the traditional Mongolian nomadic lifestyle.
Beijing's efforts to eliminate traditional culture continues, this time with a focus on traditional Mongolian life. Animal herders in China's autonomous Inner Mongolia region took to the streets to protest last year. That's after the regime imposed new regulations in August, granting commercial farming companies permission to take over land without authorities' approval. That spells particular trouble for Mongolian nomads who typically travel through China's grasslands, allowing their livestock to graze. According to Beijing, the total ban over livestock grazing aims to recover the grassland ecosystem. But the nomads tell a different story. For centuries, their animals have fed on the naturally grown grasslands, allowing their animals to graze. When the grasses in one area are depleted, the nomads lead their animals elsewhere. At the same time, the manure left behind helps to fertilize and replenish the area so new grass can grow. Retired Mongolia University professor Liu Shurun told human rights publication Bitter Winter that he supports the nomadic lifestyle. He blames the practice of keeping livestock stationary detrimental to the region, as is done by commercial animal farms. He explained it's because the grass has no time to regrow. Back in late July of this year, Chinese authorities held a meeting on whether or not to implement a ban on nomadic grazing. Before the proposal was adopted into law, they ordered an investigation into the matter. It was concluded that the ban would help implement Communist Party leader Xi Jinping's thoughts on ecological civilization. The nomads have been gradually pushed out of the region since 2011. In their place, mining companies were invited to take root, which locals complain have damaged the grasslands. Bitter Winter highlighted one Mongolian woman's post on social media following the announcement. She wrote, "If we are forbidden from grazing, how is it different from slaughtering us?"
Within 3 weeks, 2 high-level U.S. officials have visited Taiwan. After this unprecedented official contact, China has issued a stern warning and threat of possible retaliation.
U.S. Undersecretary for Economic Affairs Keith Krok arrived in Taiwan for a 3-day visit. He is the highest-level State Department official to visit the island in decades. Krok is in Taiwan for a memorial service on Saturday for former President Lee Teng-hui, who was revered by many on the island and internationally as the father of Taiwan's democracy. He is expected to meet Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen on Friday. Beijing considers Taiwan its own and opposes all official contacts between other countries and the self-governing island. China condemned the visit and warned it could retaliate. One day before Krok's arrival in Taiwan, 2 Chinese anti-submarine aircraft flew into Taiwan's air defense ID zone and were warned by Taiwan's Air Force to leave. Krok's visit follows the one last month by U.S. Health Secretary Alex Azar, the highest-level U.S. official to come to the Democratic Island in 4 decades. During Azar's visit, Chinese Air Force jets briefly crossed the midline of the Taiwan Strait and were tracked by Taiwanese missiles. The top U.S. diplomat for East Asia, David Stilwell, said China's recent actions around the world were not those of a responsible global actor, but of a lawless bully. He added the United States was not asking other countries to choose sides, but to stand up against China's malign behavior and to protect their own sovereignty and economic interests.
Sources say the U.S. is pushing forward with the sale of as many as 7 major weapon systems to Taiwan. That's despite opposition from China.
The United States is planning to sell as many as 7 major weapon systems to Taiwan, including mines, cruise missiles and drones, according to Reuters sources. despite strong opposition from China. China sees Taiwan as a renegade province and has denounced the Trump administration's support for the island. The US has made intermittent arms sales to Taiwan for years, but usually spaced out and carefully calibrated to minimize tensions with Beijing. Pursuing 7 sales at once is a rare departure from precedents. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen was re-elected in January and has made strengthening defenses a top priority. Both Washington and Beijing have ramped up military drills in the region, and US warships regularly sail through the Taiwan Strait. Washington is keen to create a military counterbalance to Chinese forces in the area, building on what is known within the Pentagon as Fortress Taiwan. The latest weapons packages to Taiwan are on their way through the export process, with a notification due to Congress within weeks.
And in Hong Kong, a soon-to-be listed company is expected to bring one of the biggest initial public offerings in history. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba's financial affiliate Ant Group is set to go public at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and in Shanghai. It's seeking to raise $30 billion from the dual listing. The Chinese financial technology or fintech company is the parent company of Alipay, a money transfer app with over 1 billion active users, mostly in China. It handled over $17 trillion in transactions in the 12 months prior to June. Ant Group avoided New York for the listing with tensions between the U.S. and China on the rise. More Chinese companies are facing increased scrutiny from the Trump administration over national security concerns. Ant Group's listing hearing at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange could happen as soon as next week. Though the company won't be listed in New York, U.S. investors will be exposed to the company through Hong Kong's market. That, combined with Ant Group's participation in some of the Chinese regime's more controversial programs, is why some are raising concerns about the IPO. A D.C.-based NGO this week sent letters to President Trump as well as the U.S. investment banks who've helped with the listing. It warned that U.S. investors' money could be used to fund Beijing's effort to counter U.S. sanctions, brought on by its suppression of Hong Kong, its massive surveillance over the Chinese people, and persecution of the Uyghur ethnic group in Xinjiang. President Trump signed an executive order this July revoking Hong Kong's special trade status. That's in response to Beijing's crackdown on the semi-autonomous city's freedom. The move would harm China's ability to obtain direct foreign investment from Hong Kong, which accounts for over 60% of its total. But Chinese firms like Ant Group's massive IPO means that Beijing could continue to access hundreds of billions of foreign financing, therefore crippling the punishment from Washington. Meanwhile, according to a risk report by advisory group RWR, Ant Group and Alibaba are both investors in MegaV Technology. It's a company sanctioned by the U.S. and has been added to the entity list for enabling the Chinese regime's mass detention and high-tech surveillance of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Last week, a comment by a renowned Chinese investor stoked a public firestorm by saying that Ant Group had shared facial recognition data with surveillance system provider MegaV. He later apologized, calling it a misstatement. The company is also a participant in building China's controversial social credit system, which tracks its citizens' every move and purchase. It serves to reward and punish citizens for their behavior. In 2018, Washington vetoed Ant Group's attempt to purchase U.S. money transfer company MoneyGram, citing national security concerns. The acquisition would have given the Chinese company access to all of MoneyGram's user accounts, including those belonging to U.S. military personnel. The IPO's beneficiary would include Alibaba and many Chinese state-owned enterprises that own stock in Ant Group. Alibaba founder Jack Ma has publicly announced that as long as the country needs it, Alibaba is ready to dedicate Alipay to the country at any time. In its IPO disclosure document, Ant Group cited potential U.S. sanctions as risks to its business. The Trump administration has previously indicated that it might go after Ant Group's parent company, Alibaba, warning that it's dangerous to have Americans' information stored in cloud networks run by Alibaba. In its open letters, the DC-based NGO calls on President Trump to encourage Americans to invest patriotically and to deny the CCP the resources that enable it to oppress its own people and threaten ours with help from companies like Ant Group. Now to Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests, some of which are moving underground. 2 photos have appeared on social media displaying the unusual way that some are choosing to protest. One of them shows custom-made mooncakes, a traditional Chinese pastry usually eaten during the Mid-Autumn Festival. They are printed with words and phrases of support toward the city's police force. But a second photo reveals a slip of paper baked into the sweet treat. The note reads, "Free Hong Kong, the revolution of our times." It's unclear where exactly the note came from, but its message is clear. Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement is alive and well. Time is running out for TikTok in the United States. President Trump requested its owner ByteDance to sell off its U.S. operations, but the plan ByteDance submitted allows it to keep a majority stake.
The U.S. chip industry says it needs up to $50 billion in federal aid to keep semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. The Semiconductor Industry Association, or SIA, said in a new report that $20 to $50 billion in tax breaks and federal grants would make the U.S. the most attractive investment destination for chips, excluding China. U.S. companies lead the $400 billion chip-making industry, but many outsource production, mostly to East Asia. The lobbying group says absence of funding would threaten the United States' leadership in the industry. The pandemic has exposed the risks of having important components made abroad, and the group is making its pitch at a time when the US government might be more willing to listen. SIA's CEO told Bloomberg, "It's not a bit of a change in Washington, it's a significant shift." The report says the US only makes 12% of the world's chips, and it's likely to drop to 6% in the next 10 years, whereas China is projected to have the world's largest share. The report also says that it costs up to 50% more to build a factory in the US compared to China, and that most of the cost gap is because of government incentives.
A new report says investment between the U.S. and China has dropped to its lowest point in 9 years. And with the Trump administration's tough stance on the Chinese companies over national security concerns, it could keep dropping.
According to half-year 2020 data, bilateral investment between the US and China is at a 9-year low. That trend looks set to continue as pressure builds for Chinese companies to move out of the US. A report by Rhodium Group Consultancy says investment, including venture capital flows, fell to nearly $11 billion in January to June. That's down just over 16% on last year, the pandemic in part contributing to the fall. It's a far cry from half-yearly totals of nearly $40 billion seen in 2016 and 2017. President Trump's administration has sharply expanded actions to hobble Chinese companies, citing national security risks as a serious concern. It's not just the US, though. Swedish multinational clothing retail company H&M just announced it will cut ties with its Chinese yarn producer that operates in western China's Xinjiang region. A company statement read, H&M Group is deeply concerned by reports from civil society organizations and media that include accusations of forced labor and discrimination of ethno-religious minorities in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. H&M added it will phase out its indirect business relationship with its Chinese cotton supplier, regardless of unit and province, within the next 12 months. Amid the exposure of these alleged abuses, the NBA also recently confirmed it severed its ties to a Xinjiang basketball academy.
The wife of a U.S. Navy officer has pleaded guilty on Wednesday to being involved in smuggling military equipment to China. According to the Department of Justice, she allegedly submitted false information and attempted to fraudulently export the raiding craft and engines. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Yang Fang and his wife Yang Yang were arrested in October last year. Both of them are naturalized citizens. Lieutenant Yang held top-secret U.S. security clearance. He pleaded not guilty and is set to go on trial on February 1st next year. If convicted, he faces a maximum of 15 years in prison. According to court documents, they were not the mastermind behind this scheme, but a Chinese resident called Ge Songtao and his employee. Democratic countries are pushing back against China's use of technology to influence other world powers. Researchers from the US, Europe, and Japan are banding together to form a tech alliance made up of democratic countries to counter the Chinese regime. Called Common Code, an alliance framework for democratic technology policy, the proposal is set to publish next month. According to American news site Axios, who viewed a version of the proposal, it lists out 14 steps to set up digital privacy guidelines, secure supply chains, and conduct joint research development. The blueprint is a collaboration between analysts from American think tank Center for a New American Security, Germany's Mercator Institute for China Studies, and Japan's Asia-Pacific Initiative. Founding member countries include Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, South Korea, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the EU, and the US. According to Axios, the proposal warns of the dangers that come with the Chinese regime dictating the terms of the global economy. They add it's in no one's interest but Beijing's, and that it poses a threat to national security for most countries. The issue centers around China's industrial policy. There is an unfair advantage for Chinese national champions in the world market, stemming from vast amounts of subsidies and loan preferences for Chinese tech companies, as well as economic spying. Additionally, the Chinese regime has stressed mass data collecting and surveillance, which poses a threat to the privacy and national security of other countries. The new tech alliance plans to counter those threats in a number of ways, such as emphasizing secure and diverse supply chains, making sure important technology and research integrity is protected, investing more in tech, and taking the lead in shaping standards that align with democratic values. And Senate Democrats presented a new bill Thursday to counter China. At a whopping $350 billion, the strategy is the most comprehensive yet against Beijing. It's led by Senator Chuck Schumer and Senator Bob Menendez. The aim is to funnel money into the science and tech industries in the U.S. to rely less on China. Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Jim Risch, said at a hearing Thursday he hopes the Democrats and Republicans can meet in the middle and combine their proposals. He called it an American issue, not a partisan one. In an effort to bounce back from the pandemic-induced slump, a Hong Kong bakery studio has come up with some uniquely shaped chocolate cake creations. Among them, a flip-flop, a handbag, a banana, and even a piece of fried chicken.
Dear Harley Cake Studios founders Allison Chan and Coney Lam came up with a novel idea. They started making illusion cakes, or confectionaries in the shape of everyday items, after baking a custom cake for Chan's nephew who loves bananas.
Inside, it's our dark chocolate cake pop, which is dark chocolate cake with Italian meringue buttercream, and the outside, the yellow part, is actually a thin layer of fondant.
Posting such creations on social media brought a new wave of customers to their shop. It prompted them to switch the focus of their business, to take special orders and organize workshops for wannabe illusion cake bakers.
This illusion cake wave that is currently hitting us kind of saved us, kind of saved our business, because as I said 3 months ago, when the pandemic started to hit us, our shop was quiet for a good 2 months.
Depending on the complexity of the design, each cake takes different amounts of time to make, sometimes requiring hours to fill in the smallest details. Their viral videos have attracted a loyal clientele. What's more, the cake shop is now offering classes to share tips on how to make these eerily realistic cakes. Chase Koh attended a recent private class to learn how to make custom cakes for her boyfriend's birthday.
Technically, it's more difficult than making a regular cake, because I need to spend more time and effort to decorate it, to make it more three-dimensional and realistic.
During March and April, the studio only received 3 to 4 orders per week. And now, it's at 15 to 20 orders per week. An illusion cake typically costs around $200 US, while some could even cost over $1,500 US.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.